The room was silent, too silent. Elena stood at the door of room 718, holding a basin of warm water, watching the man who hadn't moved in 3 months. Richard Blackwood, 62 years old, former CEO of Blackwood Industries, a billionaire with more money than most countries, and according to every doctor in St. Grace Memorial Hospital, he was completely, irreversibly, lost to the world. But something felt wrong. Elena couldn't explain it. She had been a nurse for 7 years. She had cared for dozens of patients in comas. She knew what stillness looked like. She knew what absence felt like. And this man didn't feel absent. He felt like he was waiting. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting soft shadows across his face. He was handsome for his age, strong jaw, silver hair that still held traces of the black it once was. His hands rested peacefully on the white sheets, and his chest rose and fell with perfect rhythm. Too perfect. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood," Elena said softly, placing the basin on the table beside his bed. "It's time for your bath." She began her work, just like she did every morning. Warm water, soft cloth, gentle movements across his skin. She was careful, respectful. This was her job, but she never treated it like just a job. Every patient deserved dignity, even when they couldn't ask for it. As she worked, she talked. She always talked to her patients. The doctors said they couldn't hear, but Elena didn't believe that. She believed that somewhere deep inside, they were listening. "It's raining today," she said, moving the cloth across his arm. "I love the rain. It reminds me of my grandmother's house. She had this old tin roof, and when the rain came down, it sounded like music. I used to fall asleep to that sound." She paused, looking at his face. Still, peaceful. But was that a flicker behind his closed eyelids? No. She was imagining things. "Your son came yesterday," she continued, her voice dropping slightly. "Victor. He didn't stay long. He never does. He just stood at the door, looked at you for about 30 seconds, then left. I don't think he even said hello." She dipped the cloth in the water again, wringing it out slowly. "I don't mean to speak badly about your family, Mr. Blackwood. It's not my place. But I've seen a lot of families in this hospital. I've seen children who cry every day, who hold their parents' hands for hours, who refuse to leave even when visiting hours are over. And then I've seen families like yours." She moved to his other arm, working in silence for a moment. "Your daughter-in-law came too. Miranda. She spent most of the time on her phone, talking about redecorating the east wing of your house. She didn't even look at you, not once." Elena's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice calm. "I'm sorry. That's not fair of me. I don't know your family. I don't know what they're going through. Maybe they're grieving in their own way. Maybe seeing you like this is too painful for them." She finished his arms and moved to his chest, her movements careful and professional. "But I'll tell you something, Mr. Blackwood. If you were my father, I would be here every single day. I would hold your hand. I would read to you. I would tell you stories about my life and pray that somehow, somewhere, you could hear me." Her voice cracked slightly, and she stopped, taking a breath. "I'm sorry I'm getting emotional. It's just, you remind me of someone." She continued her work in silence, finishing the bath with the same gentle precision she always used. When she was done, she dried his skin, dressed him in fresh clothes, and tucked the blanket around him. "There you go," she said softly, "all clean. I'll be back this afternoon to check on you." She gathered her supplies and walked toward the door. But before she left, she turned back to look at him one more time. "I hope you're at peace, Mr. Blackwood. Wherever you are right now, I hope it's somewhere beautiful." She stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind her. And in the silence of room 718, Richard Blackwood's eyes opened. He had been awake for 3 months, 3 months of lying perfectly still, 3 months of controlling his breathing, his heartbeat, his every muscle, 3 months of listening to doctors discuss his prognosis, lawyers argue about his estate, and family members wait for him to die. It had started as an experiment, a test. After his heart attack, the doctors had warned him that his condition was serious. He might not survive. And in those terrifying hours of uncertainty, Richard had made a decision. He wanted to know the truth. He wanted to know who truly loved him and who was simply waiting for his money. So when he woke up from his surgery, he pretended he hadn't. He kept his eyes closed. He controlled his body with a discipline he had spent 60 years developing. And he listened. What he heard broke his heart. His son, Victor, the boy he had raised from birth, the heir to his empire, visited exactly 4 times in 3 months. Each visit lasted less than 5 minutes. Victor never touched him, never spoke to him, never showed any sign of grief or love. He simply confirmed that his father was still breathing, then left to continue running the company. His daughter-in-law, Miranda, was worse. She came more often, but only to take photos of his medical equipment for some kind of insurance documentation. She talked openly about selling his art collection, renovating his homes, and streamlining his charitable foundations. She spoke about him as if he were already dead. His business partners called occasionally, but only to ask his son about the future of certain deals. His old friends had stopped coming after the first month. The only regular visitors were lawyers, accountants, and hospital administrators. No one came to see Richard Blackwood. They came to see his money. And then Elena arrived. She was different from the other nurses. The others did their jobs efficiently, professionally, without emotion. They checked his vitals, adjusted his tubes, and left. They never talked to him. They never treated him like a person. But Elena talked. Every morning she would come in with her basin of warm water and her soft voice, and she would tell him about her life. She talked about the weather, about the books she was reading, about her dreams and her fears and her memories. She treated him like he was still there, like he still mattered. At first, Richard had dismissed it as professional habit. Some nurses did that. It was a technique, nothing more. But as the days passed, he realized it was something else. Elena genuinely cared. She wasn't performing for anyone. She wasn't trying to impress his family or earn a bigger tip. She simply saw him as a human being who deserved kindness. And that kindness was slowly changing everything. Elena's shift ended at 7 that evening, but she didn't leave immediately. She never did anymore. Instead, she found herself walking back to room 718, drawn by something she couldn't explain. The room was dark now, lit only by the soft glow of the medical monitors. Richard lay exactly as she had left him, peaceful and still. She pulled a chair close to his bed and sat down, watching him breathe. "I shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "My shift is over. I should go home, eat dinner, watch something on television, and go to sleep. That's what normal people do." She leaned back in the chair, crossing her arms. "But I'm not normal, Mr. Blackwood. I never have been. My grandmother used to say I had an old soul. She said I cared too much about things I couldn't change. She said it would bring me pain." Elena smiled sadly. She was right. She was quiet for a long moment, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor. "Can I tell you something? Something I've never told anyone?" She waited, as if expecting an answer. Of course, none came. "My father was a lot like you. Not rich, nothing like that. He was a construction worker, built houses with his hands. Strong, proud, never complained about anything. But when I was 16, he got hurt on the job, fell from a scaffold, broke his back." Her voice grew heavier. "He was in a coma for 8 months. 8 months of watching him lie in a bed just like this one. 8 months of hoping and praying and bargaining with God. And every single day I would sit beside him and talk to him just like I'm talking to you now. I told him about school, about my friends, about the boy I had a crush on. I held his hand and begged him to come back to me." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "He never did. He passed away on a Tuesday morning in April. I wasn't there when it happened. I had gone to school thinking he would still be waiting when I came back, but he wasn't. He was gone. And I never got to say goodbye." The room fell silent. Elena took a shaky breath. That's why I became a nurse, Mr. Blackwood, not for the money or the job security. I became a nurse because I wanted to be there for people like my father. I wanted to make sure no one ever felt alone in their final days. I wanted to give them the kindness and the dignity that everyone deserves, whether they're awake or not. She reached out and gently took Richard's hand. His skin was warm beneath her fingers. I know you probably can't hear me. The doctors say you're too far gone, that your brain has already shut down, that there's nothing left but the body. But I don't believe that. I believe you're still in there somewhere fighting to come back. And I want you to know that you're not alone. As long as I'm here, you will never be alone. She squeezed his hand gently. So keep fighting, Mr. Blackwood. Whatever darkness you're in, keep walking toward the light. I'll be here waiting for you. She sat with him for another hour, holding his hand in the darkness. And when she finally left, she didn't see the single tear that rolled down Richard Blackwood's cheek. The next morning, Elena arrived early for her shift. She had barely slept the night before, her mind full of thoughts she couldn't quite organize. Something was changing inside her, something she didn't fully understand. She went about her rounds mechanically, checking on patients, updating charts, administering medications. But her mind was elsewhere. It was in room 718 with a man who couldn't hear her, and a silence that felt more alive than any conversation. At 10 o'clock she made her way to his room with her usual supplies. The door was slightly open, which was unusual. She pushed it wider and stepped inside. Victor Blackwood was standing at the foot of his father's bed. Elena froze. In 3 months of working at St. Grace, she had never actually seen Victor up close. He was tall, thin, with the sharp features of a man who spent more time in boardrooms than in sunlight. His suit probably cost more than Elena's yearly salary. His eyes were cold, calculating, the eyes of someone who saw people as problems to be solved rather than souls to be cherished. "You must be the nurse," he said without turning around. "Yes, sir, I'm Elena. I take care of your father in the mornings." "I know." Victor finally turned to face her. His expression was unreadable. "I've heard good things about you. The staff says you're dedicated." Elena didn't know how to respond to that, so she said nothing. Victor walked slowly around the bed, his eyes fixed on his father's motionless form. "Tell me something, Elena. In your professional opinion, do you think he knows we're here? Do you think he can hear us?" Elena hesitated. The medical answer was no. The scientific answer was no, but the answer in her heart was different. "I believe there's always a part of us that remains aware," she said carefully. "Even when the body shuts down, the soul keeps listening." Victor made a small sound that might have been a laugh. "The soul, right." He shook his head. "My father used to talk about things like that. The soul, purpose, legacy. He built a $50 billion company, but he spent half his time giving money away to hospitals and schools and orphanages. He thought he was saving the world." "It sounds like he was a good man." "He was a dreamer," Victor corrected. "Dreamers are impractical. They waste resources on things that don't generate returns. Charity, kindness, all of it. It's inefficient." Elena felt a chill run through her. She had suspected Victor was cold, but this was something else. This was emptiness. "With respect, sir," she said quietly, "your father built something amazing. Not just a company, but a legacy of helping people. That's not inefficient. That's meaningful." Victor turned to look at her, and for a moment something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or irritation. "You're very young," he said. "One day you'll understand that meaning doesn't pay bills. Only money does." He walked past her toward the door, pausing just before he left. "Keep taking care of him," he said without looking back, "but don't get too attached. These things never end well." And then he was gone. Elena stood alone in the room, her heart pounding. She looked at Richard, lying still and silent on his bed, and she wondered what kind of man raised a son like Victor Blackwood. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." She didn't know if she was apologizing to Richard or to herself. The days passed, and Elena fell into a routine. Every morning she bathed Richard and talked to him about her life. Every evening she returned to his room after her shift, sitting in the darkness and sharing secrets she had never told anyone. She told him about her mother, who had worked 3 jobs to put Elena through nursing school. She told him about her brother, who had struggled with addiction before finally getting clean and starting a family. She told him about her dreams of one day opening a small clinic in her hometown, a place where people could get care without worrying about money. And she told him about David. "He was my fiancé," she said one night, her voice barely above a whisper. "We met in nursing school. He was brilliant, funny, kind. Everyone loved him. I loved him more than I thought it was possible to love another person." She paused, her throat tight. "We were supposed to get married 3 years ago. We had the venue booked, the invitation sent, the whole thing. And then, 2 weeks before the wedding, I got a call from the hospital. David had been in an accident, a hit-and-run driver. He was gone before I could get there." The room was silent except for the steady beep of the monitor. "After that, I closed myself off. I threw myself into work. I stopped seeing friends, stopped going out, stopped living. I told myself it was because I was dedicated to my patients, but the truth is, I was scared. Scared of feeling that kind of pain again. Scared of letting someone in and losing them." She looked at Richard's peaceful face. "But then I met you. And I know that sounds crazy. You're unconscious. You can't talk to me, can't respond, can't even squeeze my hand. But being here with you, talking to you, it's the first time in 3 years that I've felt alive again." She laughed softly, wiping her eyes. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Mr. Blackwood. How crazy is that? I'm a 29-year-old nurse, and I'm falling in love with a billionaire in a coma. My grandmother would say I've lost my mind. Maybe she'd be right." She stood up and leaned over him, brushing a strand of silver hair from his forehead. "But I don't care. You make me feel something I thought I'd never feel again. And even if you never wake up, even if you never hear a single word I've said, I'll keep coming back. I'll keep talking to you. I'll keep loving you." She bent down and pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead. "Good night, Richard." She gathered her things and left the room, closing the door softly behind her. And in the darkness, Richard Blackwood opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling, his heart racing with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. He was falling in love with her, too. 3 days later, everything changed. Elena was making her morning rounds when she was called into the administrator's office. Mrs. Patterson, a stern woman in her 60s with silver glasses and an expression that rarely changed, was waiting for her. "Please sit down, Elena." Elena sat, her nerves on edge. Being called to the administrator's office was never a good sign. "Is something wrong, ma'am?" Mrs. Patterson folded her hands on her desk. "We've received a formal complaint from the Blackwood family, specifically from Victor Blackwood." Elena's blood ran cold. "A complaint? About what?" "Mr. Blackwood claims that you've been spending excessive time with his father outside of your designated duties. He says you've been entering the patient's room after hours, which is against hospital policy." "I was just checking on him," Elena said quickly, "making sure he was comfortable. I do the same for all my patients." "For an hour at a time? Every night for the past 2 weeks?" Elena had no response to that. She hadn't realized anyone was keeping track. Mrs. Patterson sighed. "Elena, you're one of the best nurses on this staff. Your patient reviews are excellent. Your colleagues respect you. I don't want to lose you." "Then don't, please. I haven't done anything wrong." "I believe you. But the Blackwood family is one of our biggest donors. Their foundation funds an entire wing of this hospital. If they want you removed from Mr. Blackwood's care, I have no choice but to comply." Elena felt like she had been punched in the stomach. "Removed? You're taking me off his case?" "Effective immediately. Nurse Martinez will take over his care starting tomorrow. But I've been with him for 3 months. I know his routines, his needs, everything. You can't just—" "Elena." Mrs. Patterson's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm sorry, but my hands are tied." Elena wanted to argue, to fight, to scream, but she knew it would do no good. The Blackwoods had money, and money always won. "I understand," she said quietly. "Is there anything else?" "No, you're dismissed." Elena stood up and walked out of the office, her legs numb beneath her. She made it halfway down the hallway before she had to stop, pressing her back against the wall and taking deep breaths to keep from crying. This wasn't fair. None of this was fair. But life, as she had learned long ago, was rarely fair. That evening, Elena broke the rules one last time. She waited until the night shift was distracted, then slipped into room 718. Richard lay exactly as he always did, peaceful and still, his silver hair catching the soft light from the monitors. "Hello, Richard," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "This is goodbye." She sat down in her usual chair, reaching out to take his hand. "They're taking me off your case. Victor complained about me spending too much time with you. Ironic, isn't it? He doesn't care enough to visit, but he cares enough to get me fired." She laughed bitterly. "I know I shouldn't be angry. It's not professional, but I am angry. I'm angry that the people who should love you the most are the ones who care the least. I'm angry that money means more to them than family. I'm angry that I finally found someone who makes me feel alive, and now I'm being forced to walk away." She squeezed his hand tighter. "I'm going to tell you something, Richard. Something I probably should have told you a long time ago." She took a deep breath. 3 months ago, when I first walked into this room, I didn't know who you were. To me, you were just another patient, just another name on a chart. But somewhere along the way, that changed. You became more than a patient. You became my friend, my confidant, the person I looked forward to seeing every single day. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. And then you became even more than that. You became the person I love. I know it doesn't make sense. I know you can't hear me. I know this whole thing is crazy and impossible and doomed from the start. But I love you, Richard Blackwood. I love the man your nurses describe in their notes. I love the man who built hospitals and schools and orphanages. I love the man who gave half his fortune to people he'd never meet. I love everything about you, even the parts I've had to imagine." She stood up and leaned over him, just as she had done before. "I don't expect anything from you. I don't expect you to wake up and sweep me off my feet like some fairy tale. All I expect is that somewhere, somehow, you know that you were loved. Not for your money, not for your name, but for you. Just you." She pressed her lips gently to his forehead. "Goodbye, Richard. Thank you for giving me hope again." She straightened up, took one last look at his peaceful face, and turned to leave. "Don't go." Elena froze. The voice was rough, unused, barely more than a whisper, but it was unmistakably real. She turned slowly, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Richard Blackwood's eyes were open, and he was looking directly at her. For what felt like an eternity, neither of them moved. Elena stood frozen by the door, her hand still on the handle, unable to process what she was seeing. Richard lay in his bed, his eyes fixed on her face, his lips curved into a small, gentle smile. "You can speak," Elena whispered. "You're awake." "I've been awake for 3 months," Richard said quietly. His voice was hoarse from disuse but steady, strong. "I've heard every word you've ever said to me." The room spun around Elena. She grabbed the doorframe for support, her mind racing through every conversation, every confession, every secret she had shared in the darkness of this room. "Every word?" she repeated weakly. "Every single one." Elena felt like she might faint. She had told him everything about her father, about David, about falling in love with him. She had poured out her soul to a man she thought couldn't hear her, and now she was learning that he had been listening the entire time. "Why?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why did you pretend? Why did you let everyone think you were unconscious?" Richard closed his eyes for a moment, gathering his strength. "Because I needed to know the truth." "What truth?" "After my heart attack, I realized something. I had spent my entire life building an empire. I had created more wealth than any one person could ever spend. But I didn't know who really loved me. I didn't know who would be there when the money didn't matter anymore. He opened his eyes again, and Elena saw something she had never expected to see in the eyes of a billionaire: pain. So I made a choice. When I woke up from surgery, I pretended I hadn't. I wanted to see who would come to my bedside, who would hold my hand, who would talk to me, cry for me, pray for me. I wanted to know who loved Richard Blackwood the man, not Richard Blackwood the fortune. Elena's legs gave out beneath her. She sank into the chair by his bed, her hands trembling. "What did you find?" she asked softly. Richard's jaw tightened. "I found that my son visits out of obligation, not love. He comes just often enough to avoid looking bad, but he never stays longer than he has to. He's already planning how to spend my money. I've heard him making phone calls about selling my charitable foundations, liquidating my art collection, cutting all the programs I've spent decades building." "And your daughter-in-law?" "She's worse. At least Victor pretends to care. Miranda doesn't even bother. She treats my hospital room like a waiting area before an auction." Richard's voice grew heavy with sorrow. "For 62 years I thought I understood people. I built my fortune by reading them, by knowing what they wanted before they knew it themselves. But I was blind when it came to my own family. I didn't see that they were just waiting for me to die." He turned his head to look at Elena, and his expression softened. "And then you came." Elena felt tears building behind her eyes. "You were different from everyone else," Richard continued. "You talked to me, not about business, not about money, not about inheritance. You talked to me about rain on tin roofs and books you were reading and dreams you had for your life. You treated me like a person, like someone worth knowing." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm against her skin. "And then you started sharing your secrets, your father, your fiancé, your fears and your hopes and your heartbreak. You opened up to me in ways that no one else ever has. And I fell in love with you, Elena. I fell in love with your kindness, your compassion, your beautiful soul." Elena was crying openly now, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "Why did you let me confess everything while you just lay there pretending to be unconscious?" "Because I was scared," Richard admitted. "I was scared that if you knew I was awake, you would stop being honest. You would treat me differently. You would become like everyone else." He squeezed her hand gently. "I was also scared of what I was feeling. I'm 62 years old, Elena. I've been married twice. I've had countless relationships. But I've never felt anything like what I feel for you. It terrified me." "It terrifies me too," Elena whispered. "I know, I heard you say it." They sat in silence for a long moment, hands intertwined, hearts racing. "What happens now?" Elena finally asked. Richard smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face. "Now," he said, "I stop pretending, and I start living." The next morning the hospital was in chaos. Word spread quickly that Richard Blackwood had woken up from his coma. Doctors rushed to his room to run tests. Administrators scrambled to notify his family. Lawyers, accountants, and media representatives descended on St. Grace like vultures on a carcass. But Richard refused to see any of them. He gave only one order: bring Elena to his room. She arrived to find him sitting up in bed, looking stronger than he had any right to look after 3 months of immobility. The color had returned to his cheeks, and his eyes were sharp, alert, the eyes of a man who had built an empire through sheer force of will. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair beside his bed. "We have a lot to talk about." Elena sat, still overwhelmed by the rapid change in their relationship. "First," Richard said, "I want to apologize. What I did was deceptive. I let you believe something that wasn't true. I understand if you're angry." "I'm not angry," Elena said. "I'm confused, overwhelmed, terrified, but not angry." "Good. Because I have a proposal for you." Elena's heart skipped. "A proposal? Not that kind." "Not yet." Richard smiled. "But I want you to be part of what comes next. My family, my company, my entire life is about to be turned upside down. I'm going to need someone I trust by my side, someone honest, Someone who sees me for who I really am. I'm just a nurse, Richard. I don't know anything about business or finance or... I'm not asking you to run my company. I'm asking you to be my partner, my companion, my friend." He paused. "And if you're willing, something more." Elena felt the world tilt around her. "This is insane," she said. "We barely know each other. I mean, I've been talking to you for 3 months, but you've never said more than 2 words to me. How can we be partners when we've never even had a real conversation?" "Then let's have one now." Richard reached out and took her hand again, his grip firm and reassuring. "Ask me anything. Anything you want to know. I'll answer honestly." Elena thought for a moment. "Why did you become a philanthropist? Victor seems to think it was a waste of resources." Richard's expression darkened. "Victor never understood. He thinks money is the goal, but money was never my goal. It was just a tool." He leaned back against his pillows. "When I was young, I grew up poor, really poor. My father worked in a factory and my mother cleaned houses for wealthy families. We had nothing, but we had each other. We had love. And I saw what poverty did to people. Not just the hunger and the cold, but the hopelessness, the way it crushed their spirits." He looked at Elena with intensity. "When I started making money, I told myself I would never forget where I came from. I would use my wealth to give others the opportunities I never had. That's why I built hospitals and schools. That's why I funded scholarships and job training programs. Because I know what it feels like to have nothing, and I never wanted anyone else to feel that way." Elena felt a warmth spreading through her chest. "That's beautiful," she said softly. "My son doesn't think so. Neither did my ex-wives. They thought I was wasting my inheritance, throwing away money that should stay in the family." Richard shook his head. "They never understood that the money was never really mine. It was just passing through my hands on its way to people who needed it more." "Is that why Victor is the way he is?" "Partly. But I also made mistakes. I was so focused on building my empire that I neglected my family. I wasn't there for Victor when he was growing up. I let nannies and tutors raise him while I was in boardrooms and on airplanes. By the time I realized what I had done, it was too late. He had already learned that success mattered more than love." Richard's voice grew quiet. "He became what I taught him to be, and I have to live with that." Elena squeezed his hand. "It's not too late," she said. "People can change. Relationships can heal." "Maybe, but not until I confront him with the truth. He needs to know what I've heard these past 3 months. He needs to understand that I know exactly who he is." Richard's expression hardened. "And then I need to make some decisions about the future of my company and my family." The confrontation came that afternoon. Victor arrived at the hospital in a whirlwind of expensive cologne and barely concealed impatience. He strode into Richard's room without knocking, stopping dead when he saw his father sitting up in bed. "You're awake," Victor said. His voice was flat, controlled. "The doctor said you might never—" "I know what the doctor said," Richard interrupted. "I was listening." Victor's face remained carefully neutral, but Elena, watching from the corner of the room, saw something flicker in his eyes. Fear, perhaps, or calculation. "Well, that's wonderful news. The company will be thrilled. I'll have the board schedule a call for tomorrow to discuss your return to—" "Sit down, Victor." Something in Richard's tone made Victor obey immediately. He sat in the chair across from his father's bed, his expensive suit creasing as he settled. "There are some things we need to discuss," Richard said. "Things I've heard over the past 3 months." Victor's face went pale. You could hear us? The whole time?" "Every word, every phone call you made from this room, every conversation with Miranda about selling my foundations, every discussion about liquidating my charitable programs and redirecting the funds to more productive investments." Victor's mouth opened and closed several times. "Dad, I can explain." "Don't." Richard's voice was cold, hard, the voice of a man who had built a business empire and crushed countless competitors. "I gave you everything, Victor. A name. an education, opportunities that most people can only dream of. And this is how you repay me? By counting the days until my death so you can tear apart everything I built? That's not fair, Victor protested. I was managing the company, making decisions to protect the business. You have no idea how hard it's been. I know exactly how hard it's been, because I heard you complaining about it every time you bothered to visit, which wasn't often. Richard leaned forward, his eyes blazing. Do you know how many times you came to see me in 3 months? 4? 4 visits, Victor. And not once did you hold my hand, not once did you talk to me like a father, not once did you show any sign that you cared whether I lived or died. Victor's composure finally cracked. What was I supposed to do? Sit here crying? That wouldn't change anything. It would have shown that you loved me. Richard's voice rose, filling the room. That's all I ever wanted, Victor. Not your business plans or your efficiency reports. I wanted to know that my son loved me. And I found out that he doesn't. The silence that followed was deafening. Victor sat frozen, his face a mixture of shame, anger, and something that might have been grief. Elena watched from her corner, her heart aching for both of them. Finally, Richard spoke again, his voice quieter now. I'm making some changes, effective immediately. Victor looked up, his eyes wary. Changes? I'm restructuring my estate. The charitable foundations will be protected in perpetuity. They'll have their own endowment, independent of Blackwood Industries, so that no one can touch them. Not you, not Miranda, not anyone. Victor's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. As for the company, I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations. But I'm not handing it over to you, not until you prove that you understand what it really means to lead. And how am I supposed to do that? Richard looked at his son for a long moment. By learning what I should have taught you a long time ago. That success isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in lives touched, in suffering eased, in hope given to those who have none. He paused. I'm requiring you to spend 1 year working directly with our charitable programs, not as an executive, but as a volunteer. You'll work in the hospitals we fund, the schools we build, the communities we support. You'll see firsthand what this money actually does. Victor's face twisted. That's insane. I have a company to run. The company will survive without you for a year. And if you refuse, you'll be cut off. Completely. Father and son stared at each other, the tension in the room almost unbearable. Finally, Victor stood up. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. 1 year. But after that, we'll see who you've become. Victor turned and walked out of the room without another word. The door slammed behind him. Richard let out a long breath and sank back against his pillows. That was hard, he said quietly. Elena crossed the room and sat beside him. It was the right thing to do. Was it? I've just put my relationship with my son at risk. I might have lost him forever. Or you might have saved him. Elena took his hand. Sometimes love has to be tough. You're not giving up on Victor. You're giving him a chance to become the man you always wanted him to be. Richard looked at her, his eyes tired but grateful. How did you get so wise? I've made a lot of mistakes. Wisdom is what you get when you learn from them. He smiled, squeezing her hand. Stay with me? Always. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Richard began his rehabilitation with the same determination that had made him a business legend. Physical therapy, speech therapy, endless tests and checkups. He pushed himself harder than any patient Elena had ever seen. And through it all, she was by his side. Their relationship grew slowly, carefully, like a flower blooming in early spring. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. They took walks in the hospital garden when Richard was strong enough. They watched old movies on Elena's laptop and debated which ones were the best. And they fell deeper in love with each other every day. But the outside world wouldn't leave them alone. News of Richard's miraculous recovery spread quickly, and with it came the inevitable media attention. Reporters camped outside the hospital trying to get interviews. Business journalists analyzed what his return would mean for Blackwood Industries. Gossip columnists speculated about his personal life. And then they found out about Elena. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. A tabloid had managed to get photos of them walking together in the garden, hand in hand. The headline screamed, "Billionaire's secret romance. Coma patient falls for nurse half his age." The hospital was flooded with calls. Mrs. Patterson summoned Elena to her office, her face grave. "This is a disaster," she said. "The board is furious. The Blackwood family is threatening to withdraw their funding. They're saying you took advantage of a vulnerable patient." "That's ridiculous," Elena protested. "Richard was never vulnerable. He was awake the whole time. He made his own choices." "Mar, I know. Mr. Blackwood has already called to explain. But the optics are terrible. A young nurse and an elderly billionaire? The public will assume the worst." Elena felt her stomach sink. "So what happens now? Am I fired?" Mrs. Patterson hesitated. "Not yet. Mr. Blackwood has made it clear that if anything happens to you, he'll move to a different hospital and take his donations with him. That's enough to keep the board at bay for now. But you need to be careful, Elena. Very careful." Elena nodded, her heart heavy. When she returned to Richard's room, she found him sitting up in bed, his expression thunderous. "I saw the news," he said. "This is my fault. I should have protected you from all this." "It's not your fault. It's no one's fault." Elena sat down beside him. "We knew this would happen eventually. You can't keep a secret forever." "I can try." Richard's jaw tightened. "I'm going to make some calls. I know people in the media. I can get them to kill the story." "No?" Richard looked at her in surprise. "No? If you try to suppress this, it'll only make it worse. The press will dig deeper, find more dirt, make up things that aren't true. The only way forward is to face it head on." "How?" Elena took a deep breath. "We tell our story, the real story, not through tabloids and gossip columns, but on our terms. We show the world who we really are and let them make their own judgments." Richard was silent for a long moment. "That's a big risk," he finally said. "People can be cruel. They might not understand. Then we help them understand." Elena took his hand. "I'm not ashamed of loving you, Richard. I'm not going to hide it or apologize for it. If the world wants to judge us, let them. As long as I have you, I can handle anything." Richard looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. Wonder, perhaps, or gratitude, or something even deeper. "How did I get so lucky?" he whispered. "You faked a coma for 3 months. That takes dedication." He laughed, the sound filling the room. "I love you, Elena." "I love you too, Richard." And in that moment, surrounded by controversy and uncertainty and the watchful eyes of the world, they both knew that everything was going to be okay. 1 year later. The sun was setting over the Blackwood estate, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Elena stood on the terrace, watching the colors change, feeling more at peace than she had ever felt in her life. So much had changed in 12 months. Richard had made a full recovery, returning to health with a vigor that amazed his doctors. He had stepped back from the day-to-day operations of his company, focusing instead on the charitable work that had always been his true passion. Together they had traveled to Africa, Asia, and South America, visiting the schools and hospitals and clinics that his foundations had built. And somewhere along the way, they had gotten married. The ceremony had been small, private, held in the hospital chapel where they had first met. Only a handful of guests were invited: Elena's mother and brother, a few close friends, and Mrs. Patterson, who had surprised everyone by crying through the entire service. Victor hadn't come. He was still serving his mandatory year of volunteer work, building houses in Southeast Asia with a nonprofit organization, but he had sent a message, brief and formal, wishing his father well. It wasn't much, but Richard had called it progress. Now, standing on the terrace of her new home, Elena marveled at how much her life had changed. A year ago she had been a lonely nurse, still mourning her lost fiancé, afraid to let anyone close to her heart. Now she was married to a man she loved more than she had ever thought possible, living a life she never could have imagined. "You're thinking again." She turned to find Richard walking toward her, a glass of wine in each hand. He moved easily now, with none of the stiffness that had marked his first weeks out of the hospital bed. He was healthy, strong, alive. "I'm always thinking," she said, accepting the wine. "It's what I do." "Anything important?" "Just how lucky I am." Richard smiled, putting his arm around her. "We're both lucky. If I hadn't faked that coma, I never would have found you. If you hadn't faked that coma, you never would have known the truth about your family." "That, too." His expression grew more serious. "I got a letter from Victor today." Elena looked at him in surprise. "What did he say?" "He's finishing his volunteer year next month. He wants to come home." Richard paused. "And he wants to apologize." "That's wonderful." "Is it? I don't know if I can trust him yet, after everything that happened." Elena turned to face him fully. "Do you remember what I told you in the hospital? About love having to be tough sometimes?" "I remember." "The other part of that is forgiveness. It doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means choosing to move forward instead of staying stuck in the past." She squeezed his hand. "Victor made mistakes. So did you. But he's trying to change. That has to count for something." Richard was quiet for a long moment. "You really are too wise for your own good," he finally said. "I learned from the best." He laughed softly and pulled her closer. "I'll call him tomorrow. Invite him to come home." "Good." They stood together in silence, watching the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky. The world was still complicated, still full of challenges and uncertainties. Victor's return would bring new tensions. The media still watched their every move. There were problems to solve and obstacles to overcome. But none of that mattered right now. Right now, there was only this moment, this terrace, this sunset, this love. "Thank you," Richard said softly. "For what?" "For talking to me all those months ago when everyone else had given up, for seeing me when I was invisible, for loving me when I had nothing to offer." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. "You had everything to offer," she said. "You just didn't know it yet." He leaned down and kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. "I know it now." And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Richard Blackwood held his wife close and thanked whatever force in the universe had brought her into his life. He had spent 62 years building an empire, but this was his greatest achievement. This was his legacy. Not money, not power, not influence. Love. It had always been love.